This podcast is brought to you by North Carolina's electric cooperatives.
This is NC Spin, an unrehearsed discussion on issues of interest to North Carolinians. Now, here is your moderator, Tom Campbell.
Thank you for watching this week's NC Spin. We promise it'll be 30 minutes worth seeing. Last week we told you about a battle between Vidant Hospital in Greenville and the UNC Board of Governors. Well, this week there was a surprising turn of events. We'll analyze it for you. We also discuss a statewide summit held earlier this week to address the opioid crisis in our state. Then we talk about a jury finding that Bishop William Barber was guilty of trespassing in the legislature. And of course, we won't sign off till the panel tells us something we don't know. Speaking of which, this week's panel includes Becki Gray, Vice President for the John Locke Foundation, John Hood, syndicated columnist and author, Rob Schofield, NC Policy Watch's director, and Rufus Edmisten, who used to have fame as former Secretary of State and Attorney General, but now a celebrated author. Well, we'll begin our uninterrupted debate after these brief messages from our underwriters.
Partners for Innovation in Healthcare. We're supporting common sense solutions for North Carolina's healthcare delivery system, promoting access, affordability, quality care, and innovation. Visit us on the web at pihc.info.
Life's busy, but you're in control. As an electric cooperative member, you have access to lots of tools to help manage your home energy use and budget, so you can focus on what's most important.
From treating the newest member of your family to helping a loved one make end-of-life decisions, your family physician is with you every step, for every stage of life, for every member of your family. Despite a healthcare landscape fraught with potential landmines, family physicians across North Carolina are providing you a lifetime of committed, dependable medical care. Family Physicians, your trusted healthcare advisor for life.
NC Spin is brought to you in part by the North Carolina Farm Bureau. The Farm Bureau and Agriculture. We keep North Carolina growing.
Earlier this week, our panel appeared before the 4-H Citizenship Focus event. I got to tell you, we were mightily impressed with the young people we met and the questions that they asked us. We enjoyed being with them. Now, let's get started. On Monday, we saw a surprising turn of events in the battle between Vidant Hospital in Greenville and the UNC Board of Governors. Last week, we told you UNC was suing Vidant Health Systems after the Pitt County Commissioners voted to change the number of Vidant board members allowed in a 2013 contract. Well, this week, ECU Interim Chancellor Dan Gerlach and Brody School of Medicine Dean Dr. Mark Stacy sided with UNC and asked the Pitt County Commissioners to reconsider and back off their fight. Becki Gray, we didn't see that one coming. What's the significance of this message, and what do you think it means to the mediation taking place now?
Well, of course, I think it's important to remember that the question here is Vidant Hospital part of a public teaching hospital? And if so, if they are connected with Brody School of Medicine and ECU, if so, they are entitled to some additional Medicaid reimbursements and some other special treatment, if you will. Again, it's a public teaching hospital. So it was not a surprise, I don't think, that Dan Gerlach, ECU, and the Brody School of Medicine weighed in on this. It may have been a surprise that they sided with the UNC hospital, but just a couple points. One, I think that it shows the leadership that Dan Gerlach is now having at ECU. He didn't come out immediately with the position. He sat back, I think, evaluated everything, came out with this position. We're also seeing this week, even since Monday, there have been some developments in this court case that you're talking about, in that there's really a standstill here. So there's no clear direction of where this is going to go or where it's going to end up.
As far as it goes, talking about Dan Gerlach, he said he didn't know anything about this. He hadn't been told about it. He had not been in office all that long, to be sure, but he said he and the dean did not know what the Vidant and Pitt County Commissioners were doing. He was blindsided by the whole thing, which is why he responded the way he did. Now, the interesting part about this is last week, if you remember, we talked about the fact this case seems to be mediated in the media. Gerlach sent an email to all of his faculty. Well, you had to know that was going to leak. and it did.
Yes.
Were there better ways to have approached this, I guess is the question.
I suspect that he needed to clarify what ECU's position was, and I agree with Becki. The notion that East Carolina, which is simply a constituent institution in the University of North Carolina system, would have had some radically different position from UNC would have been very surprising. In fact, it would have been also very surprising if Vidant and Pitt County had told or consulted with ECU about it ahead of time, because they would have assumed ECU was on UNC's side of the dispute.
Rob, people down in Greenville and eastern North Carolina are just livid. They think this is one more stone being piled on so far as East Carolina and the eastern part of the state is concerned. And their take on all of this is that Gerlach was just operating under orders from the Board of Governors and UNC President Bill Roper.
I think that's who hired Dan, was Board of Governors and Bill Roper. I think that makes sense that he's responding to them. If you go to the Vidant website, I don't know if you all have done this, the very front page is the head of the system sitting down for a radio interview with Henry Hinton, who's of course a friend of NC Spin, talking about how this is a terrible assault on the freedom of and the people of Eastern North Carolina. They've got a hashtag, a stand with Eastern North Carolina. I mean, it's really turned into sort of a tribal. I was expecting.
Well, I feel like they've been picked on
exactly.
them.
I expected like a football game challenge or something like that. It's gotten very basic, and it has very little to do actually with healthcare or serving people. It's a turf battle between politicians.
Well, and that's the sad part about all of this, is that they're fighting this out over, instead of helping people. Rufus, as far as it goes, what do you think Dan Gerlach's email message has here? What impact has it had? Becki said that they're still in negotiation, but I mean, wouldn't that kind of tip the scales?
Well, it certainly would, and I think he's saying, look, you let hubris get a hold of you, Vidant, and it was a very almost trying to be a little bit greedy on the part of Vidant to say that, look, we no longer want these board members on here. So Gerlach was saying, hey, straighten up, hold on here. This is a UNC system entity, and we're not going to let it be diluted. He sent a strong message.
I gotta add that the people down in Greenville feel like that the UNC Board of Governors broke the contract, not the other way around.
Correct. On the selection of board members, and also more broadly, remember there is this suspicion on the part of Vidant folks and some people in East North Carolina that UNC's ultimate plan is for UNC Healthcare and Vidant to merge, or for some other merger like that to happen. And that would be arguably based on economies of scale, actual delivery of care arguments one way or the other, and not just about political
Becki,
turf.
the people I've talked to say that ECU and Vidant, ECU and the Brody School don't really get along with Vidant all that well anyway.
Does anybody in the eastern part of North Carolina get along with anybody else? It's kind of the news here.
Folks, direct your hate mail to Becki Gray. I'll give you the address.
Why can't we just get along?
Exactly, like they do in Raleigh. But, Tom, we couldn't talk about this without mentioning the General Assembly and the provision that was in the Senate budget.
Right.
And I think, one part that we're going to see on this is if they can't get this straightened out in Greenville, I think the General Assembly is going to step in and make the decision for them.
Well, I've been asking around, what is the ultimate outcome of this? Most people feel like that the ultimate decision is that we're going to go back to what they originally were doing before.
I think they probably will, and I think it was interesting. Our Joe Killian reported this week at NC Policy Watch. He talked to a couple of Pitt County commissioners who didn't want to be identified, but they said this goes way back. This goes back to Harry Smith and the battle and the UNC system micromanaging, getting rid of Cecil Staten as chancellor at ECU. There's a lot of bad blood, and it's all
actually, it goes back to 1970.
Well, yeah.
What year was it?
When or whatever.
The fight between Leo Jenkins and Bob Morgan and Bill Friday and the UNC hospital. Remember the fight
absolutely.
to try to get med school down there to start off with?
I think it has to go back to establishing and reassuring citizens across eastern North Carolina that ECU is a public teaching hospital, and it is there to serve the citizens of eastern North Carolina and to provide health care at lower cost and greater access. I mean, that's what's, in all of this of who said what and who likes who and all of this, that's the part. And Rob, you alluded to it. What's missing in this discussion is how do we get good health care in the eastern part of North Carolina?
And with the changing economics of what's going on in hospitals today, John, last week on the show, you made a comment I think deserves bringing up again. And I said, can Vidant Hospital survive on its own? And I think your response was no, it can't.
Well, I mean, I don't remember that. I try to tune out everything I say from week to week, so I keep everything fresh.
Can't remember it,
I want to disagree with myself as much as
Having
possible.
bad problems with memory, are you, in your advanced age? So the ultimate outcome probably will be we go back to the status quo. But in the meantime, we've stirred up a lot of waters and a lot of emotions.
But probably some really good discussions to have on as these hospitals get bigger and as they merge and the hospital systems get bigger. I mean, what is the responsibility? What's the responsibility to taxpayers when public money is being used?
Brody School, by the way, is the only med school that doesn't own its own teaching hospital, and that makes this relationship different.
These are all explanations to the conflict, but I think, to return to a previous point, this is also simply a crying need for leadership, for people who can understand other people's points of view, get them in a room, really try to understand and make a deal, and not have this flare up into these public conflicts all the time.
I would predict in the end, Tom, that UNC system will win.
You're putting your money on them, huh?
I wouldn't bet against it.
Safe bet. Speaking of leadership, I'm going to exercise some right now. Between 1999 and 2017, more than 13,000 North Carolinians lost their lives due to drug overdoses. That's far more than died in auto accidents. This week, more than 800 people gathered in Raleigh for a 2-day summit focusing on opioids. 4 people a day die from opioids in our state. And since 2017, more than 12,000 have been helped. Rob, much of this discussion during this 2-day focused on, or through the past, has focused on too many prescriptions being given to people from physicians. But the crowd was told that the actual amount of opioid prescriptions has decreased 24% in the last 2 years. So is the opioid problem now being driven by illicit drug dealers and selling heroin and fentanyl?
It's a problem, but I think we've learned the lesson that we're not going to solve our drug problems through the criminal justice system. That's something that's got to be a part of the solution. This is attributable ultimately to two big factors we need to highlight. Number one is that large, often predatory pharmaceutical companies were pushing this stuff for years and years. They were downplaying the negative impacts of opioids. They were pushing them on doctors to prescribe them in much more excessive ways than they should have.
And that's not just opinion, by the way. That's been documented.
That's why they're being sued in hundreds of lawsuits across the country, including both civilly and criminally. Our own Attorney General Josh Stein is involved with that. The second factor that Governor Cooper and Secretary Cohen, who highlighted this week, and I think they deserve credit for some of the progress that's been made, is that the statistics, the data show increasingly that the states that have expanded Medicaid, that have closed the coverage gap, they have bigger success in attacking the opioid problem.
I want to get to that in a minute. DHS Secretary Mandy Cohen, as Rob was mentioning, says this is a public health crisis in our state. Are people really aware of the fact that we've got this epidemic, this crisis?
Well, Tom, at the 4-H meeting the other day, you asked for a show of hands, and I was astounded at the number of hands that went up. If they knew someone who had been affected by this or overdosed or died, and the hands went up, and I think people are aware. They're just saying, well, it doesn't affect me right now. Rob mentioned prevention. Now, I'm a great proponent of drug courts. That is a component part of this, because we found that locking people up like I used to when I was Attorney General, it doesn't work in some of these cases. We need more treatment, and especially mental health.
Well, and particularly so far as treatment of overdoses, naloxone is the antidote for people who are on opioid overdoses. But that's a temporary solution, Becki. I mean, we need more drug treatment facilities across the state. We only have 3 state-owned. There's some private facilities, but there's not enough, is there?
No, of course there's not. And there's, as Rufus says too, I mean, the key to this is treatment, mental health treatment. How do we expand that to avoid this problem? Not just people that find themselves in this addiction trap, but also how do we avoid this and addressing those mental health needs. And there's things that we can do. Repealing the certificate of need requirements for mental health beds, for psych beds, is one way to do it. Tom, there's a bill that's working its way through the General Assembly, a small thing but kind of a different way of looking at it, that would allow physical therapists to treat more back injuries. Right. Part of it is, people get addicted to opioid drugs for pain relief. Are there other ways to do that? And there are, through regulatory things, that I think think we need to be looking at as well.
John, Governor Cooper spoke, and he remembered that Ohio Governor John Kasich was at Rural Day in North Carolina earlier this year, telling the crowd that in Dayton, Ohio, a city that had some of the highest opioid death rates of any in the nation, that the death rate had dropped 50% after that state passed Medicaid expansion. Why is that the case? Or is it related?
Well, for one thing, it is a particular claim that has been subjected to careful study. Ohio is not Dayton, and the relationship between Medicaid expansion and opioid is more complicated than the governor let on. It also cost a lot more to Ohio taxpayers than he originally promised them. What I would say about this is Medicaid expansion is a broader topic, has a lot of other implications to it. You don't need it in order to address this problem, though you could argue that some additional money flowing into the system allows people to access certain treatment. But if we want to focus on this particular problem, let's focus on this problem and spend dollars on this.
Governor Cooper says it is directly related, contradicting this. He said half the people who come in with opioid problems, drug overdose, drug addiction problems, don't have health insurance, and that getting them some access and insurance will help in providing better health.
There's a new study just out of West Virginia, same factor. They expand Medicaid, they see the opioid addiction rate go down. There's a video we put on the Progressive Pulse, which is the NC Policy Watch blog this week, that came from the group NC Child, in which these two dads, Steve and Gary, I think are their names, tell the story of their children, 20-something kids, who were bright, promising young kids who got caught up with this. And then they were in the insurance coverage gap, and their treatment got cut off because they didn't have access to health insurance. They're both dead now. These dads tearfully tell the story.
There are two issues here: coverage gap closing as well as Medicaid expansion.
Well, that's right? Medicaid expansion closes the coverage gap. That's what they're talking about.
But it also illustrates why we need to really look at the cost of health care, at the cost of treatment, at the access to treatment. You know, just because you have Medicaid coverage doesn't mean you're going to have access to mental health beds if there aren't any mental health beds available. But Tom, one other thing that I really like about the this conference that they've done that struck me as reviewing what all occurred is that they're looking not just at the opioid crisis, but addiction. You know, this goes further, and there are a lot of families, there are a lot of people that have been stricken and burdened with addiction issues. The prisons are full of this kind of thing. So I think it's good that we look at the whole problem, not just the opioids, although the opioids is certainly a part of it.
Rufus, in making his address to this opioid addiction conference, Governor Cooper alluded to the fact that neither the House budget nor the Senate budget had Medicaid expansion in it. He said that was obviously his number one priority. I asked him in a press conference afterwards, I said, is there some discussion taking place kind of behind the scenes that maybe might be encouraging on this? And he says, well, the Democrats in the legislature are pretty solid in voting for Medicaid expansion. There are Republicans in the House who are willing to have discussions and perhaps accept some form of it. But he said it's the Senate Republican leadership that just absolutely doesn't want to have anything to do with it. What's the problem?
I hate to say this. It started out as a very sensible debate, and then Obamacare came into play. I have a notion that you'd see a totally different thing if this were not an Obama program. And they just are hung up on that we're not going to give Obama any credit. And everything, when we talk about health issues on this program, they all boil back to one thing, that it would be helpful if we were to have a Medicaid expansion. Now, John would not agree with that, but it would be helpful.
There are some legitimate reasons here, so far as costs are concerned. The feds right now are saying they're going to fund 90% of Medicaid expansion. There are a lot of people who genuinely are saying, hey, wait a minute, the government's basically broke, and
they are.
And you know, we're incurring huge deficits. And what happens if the Congress decides they don't want to do that anymore? Of course, Medicaid in general is a 2/3, 1/3 program. I don't think they would
Depends
go.
on the state, Tom. The ratio is different from state to state. There is absolutely no question in any sensible person's mind that at some point in the future, the 90% number will come down, because the 90% number is for relatively healthy people, and the smaller reimbursement rate is for the sick. They're going to bring them closer together. That's not necessarily an argument against Medicaid expansion, but it is a fundamental
Becki,
reality.
I asked the governor if Medicaid expansion is not in the budget. Is he going to veto it? Well, I think he came as close as he's ever come to doing that. But if that is the case, what's going to happen here with this budget?
Well, a couple things. One, what the governor has made clear is that he wants Medicaid expansion. He's talked in terms of it being in the budget. It doesn't have to be in the budget. I mean, it will not be in the budget that the General Assembly presents to the governor in the next couple weeks. I'm 99% sure of that. But there could be movement through another bill, through another avenue. But, this is the big standoff between the governor and Republicans. And it's not just the cost associated with it, as John's talked about. We have a Medicaid problem that's very fragile.
Yeah. We're talking about stuff going on in the legislature. Well, this is sort of related to that. Bishop William Barber was arrested in 2017 for trespassing in the legislative building. Barber and a group went to the building to advocate for Medicaid expansion. Even though the legislature was in session, they were told that the offices for House Speaker Tim Moore and Senate President Pro Tem Phil Berger were closed. So the group sat down in front of Berger's office and, according to witnesses, began a call and response chant. Workers and lawmakers in the building said the noise level was so loud they couldn't conduct their business, and the General Assembly police arrested them. Now, Barber claims the Constitution allows him the right to be on public property and also the right to meet with and instruct elected representatives. Rufus, you're our legal beagle here. A jury deliberated 15 minutes before returning a verdict saying that they found Barber guilty of second-degree trespassing. Were they right?
They certainly were, and it should have taken about 5 minutes because the law says you can lawfully start an entrance somewhere and then it can become unlawful. And here we became unlawful because you have to have peaceable assembly. Nobody doubts the fact that you can go petition your representatives for a grievance, but he did wrong, and absolutely it was a correct verdict.
Rob, the opinion seems to be from a lot of people that yes, these people have their rights to be in this building, and they have their rights to be able to petition their legislature, but what happened after that, the actions after that, disrupting the flow of business in the legislature was what the problem. Would you agree with that?
To an extent. I mean, Bishop Barber's a friend of mine. He's somebody I admire greatly. He is someone who I think has tremendous courage. He's not afraid of being arrested. He's not afraid of going to jail. This man has engaged in civil disobedience intentionally. I don't think that's what this was here. And I think there's obviously a line between, as he says, when are you talking too loud? And when is it disruptive? The legislature was actually able to get its business done.
But I think there is a general feeling that the legislative building is a little less respective and helpful and welcoming than it has been in years past. For instance, having to go through metal detectors, moving the press room. There just is a general atmosphere over there that we don't want you here. Would you agree?
There is certainly heightened security, and the moving of the press corps was a different matter. I think in this case, you just follow the rules, and he did not follow the rules. That is civil disobedience is perfectly fine, but that means you accept the consequences of your actions. You don't deny that you were guilty, which is what he did.
But he's very intentional about the civil disobedience he engages in. In this case, that was not intended to be that way. And I think there is a line that somewhere, you're talking too loud. When does that become civil disobedience?
Okay, I got that.
But when your rights infringe on my rights, sure, that's when there's a problem. Now, I'll tell you, I was at the building. During those Memorial Monday protests. They cleared the gallery on many cases because there were so much noise that they couldn't conduct business in the House chamber and in the Senate chamber. I had to leave too. I was there to do my work.
Yeah.
That's where the rights,
I think some are saying this is the only way we can get any attention. I need to switch over and ask you guys to tell us something we don't know. Rob Schofield, I'm going to start with you.
Well, I wanted to mention to folks that there was a great event in Raleigh this week that involved care of creation. The idea that we had the head of the Union of Concerned Scientists was at Pullen Memorial Baptist Church, together with people from Interfaith Power and Light, the North Carolina Council of Churches, to talk about climate change. They came to the conclusion that there's a lot that we can still do. Our time is limited. It was a tremendously important presentation. Folks should check it out.
Rufus, tell us something we don't know quickly.
Something nice about the Rare Disease Council. It's an established fact now, and we're looking for ways to help have newborn screening.
All right, Becki, tell us something we don't know.
We have a solar panel problem in North Carolina. We are the second largest solar panel state in the country. These things have a limited lifespan, and when they are spent, we're going to have a problem with recycling. General Assembly's looking at it. Good
John,
for them.
tell us something we don't know.
Our largest new company based in North Carolina, the merger of BB&T and SunTrust will be called Truist Bank, based in Charlotte. Don't expect that name to stick.
Nobody's liking that name. And they're going to move their headquarters. Yeah, they're going to move their headquarters to Charlotte.
It's in between Winston and Atlanta, but lots of people on both sides of the bank are pretty upset with this ridiculous name.
Adolphus Branch is turning over in his grave, I can tell you that. Well, you've heard our spin on the issues of the day. To stay informed all during the week, sign up for our free weekly email newsletter, give your feedback, and read my weekly column. Be sure to visit our website, ncspin.com, or catch NC Spin on Facebook. And join us next week when we'll have more balanced debate for the Old North State. Until then, stay informed and watch out for the spin.
Partners for Innovation in Healthcare. We're supporting common sense solutions for North Carolina's healthcare delivery system, promoting access, affordability, quality care, and innovation. Visit us on the web at pihc.info.
Life's busy, but you're in control. As an electric cooperative member, you have access to lots of tools to help manage your home energy use and budget, so you can focus on what's most important.
From treating the newest member of your family to helping a loved one make end-of-life decisions, your family physician is with you every step, for every stage of life, for every member of your family. Despite a healthcare landscape fraught with potential landmines, family physicians across North Carolina are providing you a lifetime of committed, dependable medical care. Family Physicians, your trusted healthcare advisor for life.
NC Spin is brought to you in part by the North Carolina Farm Bureau. The Farm Bureau and Agriculture. We keep North Carolina growing.
North Carolina Channel is made possible by the financial contributions of viewers like you who support the UNC TV network.